In this video, we delve into the Eleusinian and Bacchic Mysteries through the lens of a work by Thomas Taylor, a devoted admirer of Hellenic tradition, particularly its philosophical lineage rooted in Plato and later developed by the Neoplatonists. Taylor, an English Neoplatonist and translator, was the first to render the complete works of both Plato and Aristotle into English, along with the Orphic fragments. His exploration of the mysteries begins with a critique and correction of a notable predecessor. Taylor opens his treatise by referencing Dr. Warburton's Divine Legation of Moses, where Warburton cleverly argued that the sixth book of Virgil's Aeneid reflects elements of the Eleusinian dramatic rites. However, Taylor asserts that Warburton failed to grasp their deeper significance and true spiritual purpose. Drawing on the Platonic tradition, Taylor claims he is able to rectify these misinterpretations and defend the profound wisdom encoded in these ancient rites, offering what he presents as a faithful account of their sacred intent. To begin his exposition, Taylor introduces two authoritative sources that clearly demonstrate that part of the mystery dramas depicted scenes from the underworld, sources which Warburton had evidently overlooked. The first is from the poet Pindar, cited in a fragment preserved by Clement of Alexandria, in which Pindar remarks, "Blessed is he who, having witnessed the common rites below, understands both the conclusion of life and its divine origin from Zeus." The second is taken from Proclus's commentary on Plato's Politicus, where Proclus notes that Plato, in alignment with sacerdotal symbolism, built many of his doctrines on these mythological foundations. Specifically, in the Phaedo, Plato alludes with reverent silence to secret teachings that liken embodiment to imprisonment, enforced by a watchful guard, and describe the posthumous fates of souls, distinguishing between the purified and the impure, who follow divergent paths in Hades. These teachings, as handed down through sacred tradition, were filled with symbolic imagery akin to dreams, visions of ascent and descent, the Dionysian myths, the guilt of the Titans, the triple roads of Hades, and the restless journeying of related spirits. With these testimonies in place, Taylor proceeds to argue that the symbolic performances of the lesser mysteries were crafted by ancient theologians to covertly express the state of the impure soul, one bound in flesh, entangled in the realm of matter and mortality. In essence, such a soul could be said to die in this life, insofar as a soul is capable of death, and at the body's dissolution, it would undergo a second, deeper kind of death if it remained unpurified. Taylor points to the philosopher Macrobius, who noticed that the soul's union with the body implied a sort of death, though he failed to grasp the full allegorical depth intended by the ancients, believing instead that their depictions of Hades referred merely to the physical condition. Yet Taylor insists this is a misreading, since nearly all ancient theological and poetic traditions clearly taught a belief in an afterlife with rewards and punishments, subtly communicating that what they called the death of the soul was in fact its deep entanglement with the corruptible body. If the wise men of old believed both in a future state of retribution and in the soul's embodiment as a kind of death, then it logically follows that the soul's punishment beyond this life is simply a continuation of its current condition, a passage not from waking to waking, but from one slumber to another, from one dream into the next. Let us turn, then, to what these venerable thinkers actually said about the soul's entanglement with material existence. We begin with Heraclitus, that most enigmatic and profound of the early philosophers, who spoke of the unembodied soul in paradoxical terms. We live their death, and we die their life. Empedocles, lamenting the state of generation, evokes the soul's descent into mortality with these poignant lines. Her form transformed by ruin's dread decay, she drives the living down death's shadowed way. Elsewhere, expressing sorrow over the soul's fall into bodily life, he exclaims with moving despair, "For this I mourn, this is the source of grief, that ever I beheld this world so strange." Plato, too, famously referred to the body as the tomb of the soul, and in the Cratylus he echoes the teachings of Orpheus, affirming that the soul suffers punishment through its union with the body. This idea was likewise held by Philolaus, the notable Pythagorean, who is quoted as saying, through a passage preserved in the writings of Clement of Alexandria, that ancient priests and theologists affirmed the soul's embodiment as a punitive act, whereby it is entombed in the body as in a grave. Even Pythagoras himself supported this view, declaring in poetic form that all waking perception is a kind of death, and sleep only a dreamlike echo of it. The mysteries, according to this tradition, were veiled teachings that symbolically expressed the same sublime idea, that the soul, when submerged in matter, dwells among the dead, both in this world and beyond. Though this conclusion naturally flows from the preceding teachings, it is further and undeniably confirmed by the testimony of the great Plotinus. In his writings, Plotinus declares that when the soul descends from its divine origin into the realm of generation, it partakes of evil and sinks far from its original clarity and unity. To be fully immersed in this state is, he says, to fall into a kind of dark mire. He explains that the soul experiences death to the extent that it can die, this death being her immersion in the body, her descent into matter, where she becomes enslaved to it. Even after leaving the body, the soul may remain bound there, until she is roused and turns away from that repulsive darkness. This, he says, is the meaning of the soul's sleep in Hades, of those who have arrived there still unawakened. Here we see a clear and beautiful interpretation of the mysterious doctrine hinted at by Plato in the Phaedo, that the soul, unless purified, lies sunken in filth after death. This reading not only clarifies Plato's cryptic remarks, but also affirms our understanding of the hidden meaning behind the ancient rites. In a related passage, Plotinus, writing in his Discourse on the Beautiful, offers an allegorical reading of the Narcissus myth. He explains that the soul which mistakes physical beauty for true reality, like Narcissus gazing at his reflection, falls into illusion. These forms are no more than radiant phantoms dancing on the surface of water. Captivated by these reflections, the soul, like Narcissus, plunges into the stream, not with the body, but with its very essence, and is lost in a darkness hostile to reason and higher insight. In this state, both in life and after death, the soul remains blind and consorts with mere shadows. What further confirms this interpretation is the view held by the Egyptians regarding matter. According to Simplicius, the Egyptians referred to matter, symbolically called water, as the residue or dregs of the original life. In their conception, matter was likened to mire or mud, a base sediment compared to the purity of the divine. From this, we may confidently draw the same conclusion as that reached by Ficinus, whose words align perfectly with this account. He writes that, in summary, the ancient theologians believed divine realities alone truly existed, while all other things were but shadows and reflections of truth. Therefore, those who dedicated themselves to divine contemplation were considered to be the most awake among humanity. On the other hand, those lacking foresight, who chased after things of a lesser nature, were seen as having fallen into a kind of sleep, being caught in illusions like dreamers. And if such individuals died before awakening from this state, they would find themselves in the afterlife still trapped in visions, but ones even more deceptive and dazzling than before. Thus, as those who pursued true and divine realities in this life would enjoy the highest truth after death, so those who pursued falsehoods would suffer in the next life, tormented by extreme illusions. One would be rewarded with genuine joy, the other punished with phantoms of pleasure that are nothing but hollow imitations. Although this profound teaching was hinted at in the lesser mysteries, it must not be assumed that it was fully revealed to all initiates. Since these rites welcomed people of various backgrounds, it would have been improper to lay bare such elevated and abstract doctrines before the general crowd. It was sufficient to instruct them in the existence of an afterlife involving consequences, both rewards and punishments, and in the way back to the divine source from which their souls originally descended. According to Plato in the Phaedo, this was the ultimate aim of the mysteries, to show the soul how to return to its origin. The belief in a future state naturally follows from this teaching. This explains why such insights were truly understood only by the followers of Pythagoras and Plato, who based their wisdom on the theology of Orpheus, the very founder of these sacred rites. And it also clarifies why, before Plotinus, no earlier philosopher offered a clear explanation of this truth. It was Plotinus who first pierced through the symbolic veils and allegories of the ancient tradition and revealed its deeper spiritual meaning to the world in plain form, no longer hidden beneath the cloak of myth and mystery. From this, it seems highly likely that the deeper meaning behind the mysteries was not fully grasped even by Virgil himself, despite his beautiful depictions of their outward appearance. Though traces of Platonic thought can be found scattered throughout the Aeneid, none of it reveals any profound philosophical insight beyond what might be gathered from a casual reading of Plato or a surface-level acquaintance with the ritual dramas themselves. This subtle limitation, however, often escapes modern readers, who, being unfamiliar with Platonism and captivated by Virgil's poetic brilliance, tend to assume he had a deep understanding of topics he may have only touched on lightly. This view gains further weight when we consider that the philosophical tone of his eclogues is strongly aligned with Epicureanism, the dominant worldview during the age of Augustus. Outside of the single book in the Aeneid that portrays the mysteries, there is no meaningful presence of Platonic doctrine anywhere else in his works. And even here, the few Platonic elements that appear are likely included only because they were necessary to properly illustrate the themes of the sacred rites being described. Still, if we accept that this part of the Aeneid offers us even a partial and poetic reflection of those ancient ceremonies, rendered with exceptional grace and precision, it deserves to be valued as a rare piece of sacred literature, a surviving fragment of ancient mystical wisdom and spiritual philosophy. This becomes even more evident when we examine some of the most vivid descriptions in that section of the work, which not only align with these interpretations but help to confirm them. Consider the moment when Virgil writes, "The road to the underworld is easy to find, the gates of death stand open always. But to return, to rise again into the daylight, this is a challenge, this is the true trial. A few have done it, those loved by the gods, or those whose noble nature lifted them to the stars, the children of divinity. Dense forests fill the space in between, and Cocytus, with its dark and winding waters, encircles it all." Based on what has been previously explained, isn't it clear that the reference to Avernus and the gates of the underworld should be understood as a symbol for the body or external, material nature? The descent into this realm, into matter and the senses, is indeed easy and ever-present. But to ascend again, to retrace our path back toward the higher regions of being, which is to say, to liberate the soul from the body through inner purification, is a formidable and demanding journey. Only a select few, those truly favored by the divine, not through arbitrary grace, but through an innate philosophical disposition and a powerful drive toward virtue, are capable of completing this spiritual ascent. And when Virgil mentions that the entire path is veiled in woods, this, too, is symbolically rich. The ancient use of the word forest was often a metaphor for matter, and so the description implies that the road leading into the abyss of bodily life, into the shadows of forgetfulness and confusion, is through this material veil. Surrounding it flows the gloomy river Cocytus, a symbol of mourning and despair, the inevitable sorrow that follows when the soul becomes bound to a nature alien to its own essence. In this, Virgil's vision finds a perfect parallel in the words of Empedocles, who lamented the soul's fall into material existence with a sorrowful cry. "It is for this I weep, for this I grieve, that my soul ever came to know these foreign realms." Next, consider the description Virgil gives of the cavern through which Aeneas makes his descent into the underworld. He speaks of a deep and dreadful cave, with a gaping mouth of stone, bordered by a dark lake and shadowy woods. No birds could fly above it without harm, as foul vapors rose from its gaping entrance and reached the skies. Because of this, the Greeks named it the place without birds. This image, poetically rich, can be understood as a symbol of corporeal nature, obscure, heavy, and impenetrable. The cave, surrounded by a black lake and forest gloom, echoes the endless, ever-moving, and concealed quality of physical existence. It calls to mind the vision of a restless current, ever flowing with blind momentum into the vast abyss of matter, an image of relentless descent and dispersion. It is also fitting that the place is described as lifeless to birds, or lacking a winged nature, since such nature is emblematic of what is swift, light, and ascending. Corporeal reality, by contrast, is marked by its inertia, its downward pull, and its separation from the luminous regions of truth. Existing on the furthest edges of being, it is faint, dim, and incapable of rising toward the heights of reality and exchanging its obscurity for a divine clarity. The appropriateness of offering sacrifice to night and earth before entering this domain is clear, since both are traditional symbols of the body and the world of matter. In the following lines, where the earth begins to tremble at sunrise, the wooded hills quake, and dogs howl in the darkness as the goddess arrives, we find a striking allusion to the convulsions associated with the soul's descent into physical form. This imagery strongly resembles the account of the soul's fall given by Plato, who described the entry into body as a kind of catastrophe, a shattering disruption of the higher state. As will become clearer later on, this idea of the soul's fall was one of the hidden truths conveyed through the sacred rites. The howling of the dogs is equally meaningful, as they represent the dark forces of the material realm. In ancient mystical texts, these are likened to wild, aggressive powers that hinder the soul's ascent and undermine its inner harmony. This symbolism is carried forward in the hymns of later thinkers, such as the one who spoke of the soul fleeing from the furious barking of material existence, urging it to cast off the gloom of the earthly realm and leap swiftly toward the divine light. That these dark forces would appear before visions of the divine becomes visible to the soul is no surprise. It was taught by many spiritual philosophers that before one reaches true revelation, the soul must confront misleading images and spectral forms tied to the world of matter. These illusions were believed to be the final obstacles, appearing just before illumination, to divert the soul's focus from the pure and radiant truth. In fact, it was claimed by some that these figures even took the shape of hounds, guarding the boundary between shadow and light. Following this, Aeneas is shown making his way deeper into the realm below, entering into the heavy silence of night and darkness. The path lies through shadow and solitude, through the deserted halls and barren dominion of the underworld. The poet compares it to a journey taken beneath the dim light of the wavering moon in a forest, when the sky is veiled by clouds and night has drained all color from the world. This imagery is not only poetic but deeply fitting. The sacred rites of initiation were, by tradition, performed in the secrecy of night, and the soul's descent into the world of becoming, according to ancient thought, takes place under the cover of midnight. This hour is especially suited to what is forgetful, dim, and bound to the body, and thus the nightly character of these rites alluded to the soul's immersion into the obscurity of material existence. Soon after, the narrative offers a striking and vivid passage. At the very threshold of the underworld, in its foreboding mouth, dwell the spirits of sorrow and avenging cares. Here also reside the pale forms of disease, the weariness of old age, the tremor of fear, and the gnawing presence of lack and destitution. These are figures of dread, hard to face or name. There too are death and labor, sleep that mimics death, and twisted pleasures of the mind. On the opposing threshold, one sees the shapes of war and the blood-stained nuptial beds of the Furies, and maddened discord with serpents for hair, crowned in gore. In the midst of all this stands a towering and ancient elm, beneath whose every leaf false dreams are said to cluster and make their home. Surrounding this grim scene are monstrous and chaotic forms, fierce beasts and dreadful hybrids. At the gates linger the centaurs, two-formed Scyllas, the many-armed Briareus, the hissing serpent of Lerna, and the fire-breathing Chimera. Also present are the petrifying Gorgons, the scavenging Harpies, and the phantoms of many-headed beings. What clearer image could one draw of the afflictions that cling to embodied existence? This dark procession mirrors the soul's slumber while confined in flesh, and the inner disorders it is fated to endure. The description unfolds in three layers. First, the outer world of matter filled with harsh conditions and hostile forces. Second, the idea that the soul, once bound to body, lives not in truth but in illusion, a dreamlike state. And third, through the shapes of hideous monsters, the many irrational impulses and moral distortions that plague the human condition. The ancient philosopher once referred to this realm of becoming as a land without joy, a domain of destruction, fury, and countless woes. Those who descend here stray into a wilderness of confusion and shadow, having fallen from the path of harmony. And to such a soul, rightly it is said, she turns away from divine clarity and the light of the heavens, choosing instead to serve the frenzy of division in the gloom below. Even the wild figure of discord, described by the poet as frenzied and bloodied, echoes this ancient thought, where strife becomes the ruling force of the soul estranged from truth. And the verses that follow reinforce this sorrowful journey. The soul's path into the world of body is marked by turmoil, pain, and restless wandering. There is the entrance to the seething rivers of the underworld, where the foul waters churn in black whirlpools and the stench of decay rises, spilling its filth into the ever-echoing stream of woe. When Charon warns Aeneas not to advance any further, declaring that this is the realm where only hollow shades find joy, and that nothing resides there but sleep and drowsy night, the symbolism could not be more appropriate. The dark world of matter into which the soul descends offers no true life, only shadows and the heavy stillness of unconsciousness. And as the soul presses onward, persisting in its descent, it gradually surrenders to forgetfulness, slipping into a deep and dreamless sleep, becoming at last a true dweller among the phantoms of the dead. After Aeneas has crossed the gloomy waters of the Styx, he is confronted by the monstrous guardian of the underworld, Cerberus. The poet describes how upon landing on the muddy banks where reeds grow from the dark water, Aeneas and the prophetess are met by the beast. Cerberus, immense and terrifying, fills the air with his triple-throated bark, stretched out monstrously before the entrance to his cave. This beast, in symbolic terms, signifies the soul's faculty of discrimination, for the dog, with its keen senses and alertness, has long served as a symbol of discernment. The three heads of Cerberus suggest the threefold nature of this faculty: the power of direct insight, the reasoning intellect, and the domain of opinion. Together, they guard the soul's passage through the hidden thresholds of embodied life. As Aeneas proceeds, he encounters three types of souls lingering at the margins of the underworld, three kinds of individuals whose lives ended in ways that might seem undeserving of punishment, yet who all remain entangled in matter and thus require deep purification. The first are the souls of those taken in early death, children who perished before their time. The second are those who were wrongly condemned, innocents who suffered punishment not for guilt, but by error or injustice. And the third are those who, wearied by life, brought about their own deaths. The first, the infants, are clearly still bound to a material condition, their journey in life incomplete, their souls yet unformed by virtue. The second group, though innocent of the specific wrong for which they were judged, are nonetheless portrayed as bearing other transgressions, whose true measure is now being reckoned in the deep places of the soul's descent. And the third, those who ended their own lives, though they may seem to have broken from the body, have in truth only passed from one material state into another. For such acts, in the view of divine philosophy, do not sever the soul from the body, but rather draw it back into a state that fully mirrors its former impulses, its torments, and its sorrows. If we look more deeply, we see that all three are placed together because their fates raise similar questions. Why, for instance, should a child be punished at all, or why should a person, wrongly executed in one life, suffer in another? And in the case of suicide, Plato himself observed in the Phaedo that the command against it, found in the secret teachings, carries a depth not easily grasped. The truth, however, becomes clearer when we consider the soul's journey across many lives. It is only by looking back into a prior existence that the hidden justice behind these seeming injustices is revealed. What may appear inconsistent in the workings of providence dissolves when the whole picture is seen, and the soul's past becomes visible. And as for those who choose death by their own hand, the reason their act is considered so grave and the punishment so obscure is tied to the very mystery of what the soul is, and what it means to escape, or fail to escape, from the conditions it once chose. This explanation, rooted in the teachings of Plato and rarely found elsewhere, offers a key to understanding a truth that lies beyond mere surface appearances. Olympiodorus, a most learned and insightful commentator on Plato, in his reflections on the section of the Phaedo where Plato refers to the prohibition of suicide found in the secret teachings, offers an illuminating interpretation. He explains that Plato's argument against suicide is not merely ethical or practical, but rooted deeply in the Orphic mythological tradition. According to this ancient narrative, there are four ruling epochs, the first being that of Uranus, or heaven, who was overthrown when Cronos attacked him, severing his generative power. Cronos then took power, until Zeus, or Jupiter, cast him down into the depths of Tartarus, and assumed dominion himself. Following this, Dionysus, also known as Bacchus, emerged into the world. According to myth, Dionysus was betrayed through the cunning of Hera, and torn apart by the Titans who had surrounded him. After consuming his flesh, the Titans were struck down by the wrath of Zeus, who incinerated them with his thunderbolts. From the soot or smoky remains that rose from their ashes, humankind was formed. Thus, the reason it is forbidden to take one's own life lies not in the simple idea, as Plato superficially suggests, that we are kept in the body like prisoners under watch. This, Olympiodorus argues, is self-evident and hardly arcane. The deeper truth is that the human body is Dionysian in nature. We are part of Dionysus, because we were born from the ashes of the Titans who consumed his divine form. Socrates, perhaps wary of revealing the deeper mystery, alludes only to the imprisonment of the soul, but the myth itself, openly discussed by the commentators, reveals a profound spiritual truth. Olympiodorus goes on to interpret these four divine regimes as symbols of the stages of virtue, each representing a mode of the soul's activity. The rule of Uranus, or heaven, represents the contemplative life, the soul gazing upward, drawn toward what is highest. The very name Uranus is linked with the act of beholding the things above. The reign of Kronos symbolizes the pure or inner life. Kronos is so named as one who sees inwardly, and the myth of him consuming his own children symbolizes the soul turning back into itself, absorbing its own productions. The era of Zeus signifies the social virtues, for Zeus is called the maker of the world, concerned with the ordering of outward things. Lastly, the domain of Dionysus reflects the ethical and natural virtues, and his dismemberment by the Titans symbolizes that these virtues, though distinct, are not opposed but integrated within the soul. From this, it becomes clear that the Titans, as the craftsmen of the material world and immediate precursors of creation, represent the forces from which humanity was formed. That humans are born from their remnants shows that the soul possesses a fragmented existence, one that can descend into extreme division while still bound to its essential nature. While under the sway of the body, the soul lives in constraint, subjected to the dominion of a Titan-like condition of being. Moreover, these sacred dramas presented in the lesser mysteries were meant to portray this very condition, the soul's entrapment in matter. The journey of release from this bondage, achieved through purification and spiritual exercises that separate the soul from evil, is what the ancients encoded in the myths of heroes like Hercules and Ulysses descending into the underworld and then returning swiftly from its gloom. These stories are not merely heroic fables, but allegories of liberation, expressions of the soul's path from entanglement in the material to a return to its divine origin. Proclus explains that Hercules, after undergoing sacred initiations, eventually attained a place among the divine. This signifies his awareness of the wretched condition of the soul when bound to the physical body. Through his commitment to the purifying virtues, reflected in the symbolic rituals of the mysteries, he liberated himself from the grip of material nature and rose above its domain. This is why the myth states that he dragged the three-headed hound into the light of day, symbolizing his triumph in elevating the various aspects of the soul, the intuitive, the rational, and the realm of opinion, through temperance, self-restraint, and related virtues. As for Theseus, who is portrayed as eternally punished in the underworld, his story too carries an allegorical meaning. Proclus, in the same profound work, offers a compelling interpretation. Theseus and Pirithous, both fascinated by beauty, whether of the mind or of the senses, are said to have taken Helen and descended into the underworld. This descent symbolizes their pursuit of beauty in both its intellectual and physical forms. However, only Theseus, due to his noble spirit, was eventually freed by Hercules, while Pirithous remained trapped below, unable to rise to the level of divine insight. This version of the myth does not align with Virgil's account, in which Theseus is described as eternally seated in sorrow. It also conflicts with Virgil's earlier reference to his liberation. The suggestion made by Hyginus, that Virgil simply made an error, is more credible than the theory proposed by Dr. Warburton. Warburton claims Theseus was a real individual who once forced his way into the Eleusinian Mysteries and was punished for this intrusion, first on earth and later in the realm of the dead. But if that were true, Hercules, who not only entered Hades but also forcibly removed Cerberus, would have had far greater reason to suffer punishment, yet he is not portrayed that way. Moreover, Virgil appears to be the only ancient author who condemns Theseus to such everlasting torment. Equally profound is the hidden meaning within the myths describing the punishment of impure souls, as shown in a passage from Olympiodorus' commentary on Plato's Gorgias. When Ulysses ventures into the underworld, he encounters Sisyphus, Tityus, and Tantalus. Tityus lies upon the ground while a vulture tears at his liver. The liver here represents his existence governed entirely by desire. His wisdom was confined to this internal appetite, while the earth beneath him reflects a base, degraded disposition. Sisyphus, driven by pride and rage, is condemned to endlessly push a stone uphill, only for it to roll back down each time. The stone's descent represents the disorder of his life, and his labor reflects the stubborn, unyielding resistance he faced in his own nature. Tantalus is seen near a lake and a tree heavy with fruit, both just beyond his reach. His endless grasping signifies a life ruled by illusion, while the water's constant retreat embodies the slippery, insubstantial nature of such an existence. From this, the ancient philosophers taught that the suffering a soul experiences in this life, when it succumbs to its irrational elements, is but the beginning of a torment that awaits it beyond death. The affliction is not of a different kind, but of a more intense, prolonged, and dreadful degree. Such suffering, according to their wisdom, arises not from external punishment, but from the soul's own internal state and the consequences of the life it has chosen to lead. From the example just considered, one can clearly see the immense superiority of the Platonic understanding of these myths when compared to the shallow and uninspired readings offered by thinkers like Bacon and other more recent interpreters. These more modern approaches may indeed succeed in tracing the outward parallels between myths and elements of nature or morality, because all aspects of reality reflect one another in their deep interconnection, but they fail to grasp that these stories were not crafted as idle inventions. Rather, they originated from souls of extraordinary wisdom, who shaped these myths according to eternal models, not fleeting sensory appearances, but enduring realities discovered through contemplation. Anyone with a sincere and thoughtful disposition will understand this, especially when reflecting on the fact that these wise men saw death or the underworld not as something that begins after bodily life ends, but as a condition that already unfolds here and now. In their view, sensation is nothing more than the activity of a soul that has fallen asleep to its higher nature, an awareness distorted, as it were, by the illusions of dreaming. Hence, it would be utterly unreasonable to believe that such thinkers would derive their symbolic tales solely from ephemeral appearances, without reference to the luminous truths from which these illusions are mere echoes. Indeed, the fact that their stories align far more naturally with philosophical interpretations is a powerful indication that their origins lie in the realm of intellect and spirit. This brings us to the symbolic enactments of the lesser mysteries, which formed the initial phase of these sacred rites. This stage was called by terms that signified closure and initiation, and it involved a series of completing rituals, symbolic performances, and the transmission of sacred teachings, which prepared the soul for the eventual vision of deeper truths. The progression of these rites, as outlined by Proclus in his theological writings, unfolds in a precise order. First comes the rite of completion, then initiation, and finally the unveiling or divine vision, which represents the highest stage of insight. It is also worth noting that, according to Theon of Smyrna in his reflections on mathematics and philosophy, the entire process of initiation was divided into 5 stages. He beautifully likens philosophical pursuit to the unfolding of the sacred rites. The journey begins with purification, as the sacred mysteries are not offered indiscriminately to all, but only to those deemed worthy, those who are not barred by ritual proclamation due to unclean conduct or an untrained nature. Such individuals must first undergo inner cleansing. Following this is the reception of the rites themselves. The next stage, which he identifies with direct seeing, involves the soul's awakening to the vision of truth. Then comes the moment of consecration, in which the initiate is symbolically crowned and made ready to pass on the sacred knowledge, whether as a torchbearer, a priest, or in some other sacred capacity. And finally, out of all these steps arises the true fruit of the whole journey, a deep union and fellowship with the divine, and a joy that flows from direct communion with the higher powers. This sequence mirrors the way in which political education or philosophical training also unfolds, beginning with cleansing disciplines, such as mathematical study in youth, and culminating in a life of wisdom. Empedocles describes the need for purification from earthly entanglements by drawing water from distinct springs using a vessel that cannot be broken, a metaphor for a disciplined and unshakable nature. In a parallel spirit, Plato identifies this purification with the study of key mathematical disciplines, those involving numbers, shapes, space, harmony, and the heavens. These studies serve to refine the mind and prepare it for higher understanding. In his philosophy, the next stage, philosophical instruction through exploration of reasoning, ethics, and nature, mirrors the deeper step of initiation. Plato refers to the stage of direct revelation not simply as learning, but as the intuitive grasp of timeless truths and forms. He links the symbolic binding of the head and the crowning of the initiate to the spiritual authority given to one who has achieved such insight, the authority to guide others toward the same contemplative vision. The culmination of all these stages, he teaches, is the soul's highest joy, a state of likeness to the divine as close as human nature allows. Though the revealing of sacred truths most distinctly characterizes what are known as the greater mysteries, this phase does not stand alone. It is accompanied by initiation, which remains an essential part of the process, as will be shown further on. Turning now to the greater mysteries themselves, it can be shown that, just as the symbolic performances of the lesser mysteries conveyed the soul's suffering while trapped in bodily existence, so too did the greater mysteries hint, through veiled and luminous visions, at the soul's happiness, both in this life and beyond, when freed from the stains of materiality and lifted continually toward the truth of spiritual reality. Since, according to Plato, the mysteries ultimately aim to return the soul to its original source, a full participation in spiritual goodness, it follows naturally that these teachings must have included a communication of the essential principles underlying that return. These were preserved in what were called the hidden doctrines, and the various stages of purification, along with initiation and revelation, stood as symbols for the ascent through layers of virtue needed for the soul's upward journey. And if that is so, then it also makes sense that these rituals included a portrayal of the soul's descent from a former, divine condition into the lower world. The observations that follow should clearly confirm this view. First and foremost, that the visions presented in the greater mysteries conveyed, in symbolic form, the blessedness of the soul freed from bodily influence in both present and future life is made clear by earlier reflections. For if one who lives under the sway of the irrational part of the self is rightly said to dwell in Hades even now, then the one who has overcome that lower nature belongs already to another realm, one wholly removed from such darkness. If the underworld represents a state of suffering and punishment, then it naturally follows that the purified soul must dwell in a realm of joy, a life of clarity and inner vision in the present world, and one filled with divine inspiration in the world beyond. With this premise in place, we can now turn to how Virgil portrays these blessed realms and uncover the hidden wisdom embedded in his account. After Aeneas and his guide move through the realm of shadows and glimpse from afar the deep abyss of Tartarus, the darkest depths of material existence, they journey onward to the Elysian lands. They reach the joyful regions, shaded meadows, and the blessed dwellings among sacred groves. A clearer and nobler sky here bathes the earth in violet light. They behold a sun and stars that are their own. The symbolic meaning of these radiant places is beautifully clarified by Olympiodorus in his commentary on Plato's Gorgias. He explains that the Isles of the Blessed are described as being elevated above the ocean, signifying a state beyond bodily and temporal life, thus identified with the Elysian fields. It is for this reason that Hercules is said to have completed his final task in the lands of the West. This myth reflects the soul's triumph over the dark burdens of the flesh and its entrance into a life of light and truth. Hence, the soul that has, in this life, overcome as far as possible the pull of material nature through the practice of purifying virtues, enters into the true Elysium of the soul, where it is surrounded by the luminous presence of truth and the radiance flowing from the divine source of all good. Virgil describes the activities of the blessed. Some run freely in grassy fields, playfully wrestle on golden sand, others join in rhythmic dances and joyful song. The Thracian bard in his long robe, Orpheus, sings sacred melodies, drawing harmony from the seven-toned lyre, at times with his fingers, at times with an ivory plectrum. We also find the noble lineage of Troy, the ancestors of Teucer, Elos, Assaracus, and Dardanus, the founder of the city. Aeneas gazes in wonder at their weapons and chariots. Spears remain planted in the ground, and horses graze across the plain. The same love for arms and steeds they once had in life now follows them in this repose beneath the earth. He also sees others seated on either side, feasting amid laureled groves and singing hymns in chorus, while the great river Eridanus winds through the woods, pouring down from above. Such descriptions must not be interpreted as suggesting that the soul clings to earthly habits or trivial concerns. Rather, freed from the cycle of birth and the distractions of worldly life, the soul turns wholly to what is fitting for its divine nature. Whether it competes in contests of wisdom, forms celestial dances of the imagination, awakens the sacred lyre to hymns of divine passion, or sets free its highest faculties to soar in spiritual ecstasy, the soul is engaged in pursuits worthy of its true being. It is also nourished by the solid substance of spiritual knowledge, feeding the intellect with that which is truly real. The image of the river Eridanus flowing through these blessed lands is full of meaning. It is called the greatest, not merely for its size, but because much of it disappears into the earth without surfacing again. The river here stands as a symbol of life, not mortal life, but that deeper spiritual current flowing from the divine, which moves silently and powerfully through the inner chambers of the soul, bringing fertility and illumination from above. In the lines that follow, the poet writes, "None of us have a fixed dwelling. We live among shadowy groves, and rest beside rivers and in meadows laced with fresh streams." This lack of a permanent abode among the blessed signifies their complete freedom, unbound by material limitation and purified from every desire linked to the dense and mortal shell of the body. The groves serve as emblems of the soul's inward retreat, where she draws into the depths of her own essence and, through a purely divine force, anchors herself in the unutterable foundation of reality. The meadows, in turn, represent the fertile and generative power of the gods, that creative vitality from which all beings, forms, and intelligences emerged. They are the resting place and nourishment of the soul that has been released from its bondage. That the transmission of knowledge about the soul's origins was a fundamental element in the sacred mysteries is clearly shown in Virgil's verse, and that this transmission was accompanied by a direct vision of the divine principles, or gods themselves, is confirmed by the writings of Plato, Apuleius, and Proclus. The first part is evident in the majestic lines. Before all else, a spiritual essence upholds the heavens and the earth, the watery plains, the shining moon, and the celestial stars. A universal mind flows throughout the whole, animating every part and fusing with the vast form of the world. From this divine source emerge all living things, human beings, animals, birds of the air, and creatures hidden beneath the sea's calm surface. Each of these contains a power akin to fire and a heavenly origin in their foundational nature, so far as they are not obstructed by corrupting forms. But weighed down by earthly bodies and limbs subject to decay, they fall into passion, fear, longing, sorrow, and joy, and confined in this obscure prison of matter, they no longer perceive the upper light of heaven. The very sources from which the soul sprang are also the ones into which it must eventually return. As Plato's Timaeus teaches, these include the divine craftsman, the soul of the cosmos, and the lesser gods who shape and order the world. Among these, the cosmic intellect, represented in ancient theology by the figure of Dionysus, is especially emphasized by the poet. This is because the soul, in descending into the realm of becoming, is divided and distributed in a manner aligned with the mythic unfolding of Dionysus. This idea, explored in the teachings of Olympiodorus, finds further support in his commentary on Plato's Phaedo. There he explains that the soul descends into life after the pattern of Persephone, is scattered into embodiment in the likeness of Dionysus, and is bound within the body as Prometheus was, under the dominion of titanic forces. To free herself, the soul must draw upon the strength of Hercules, breaking these bonds through effort and struggle. She is then recollected and restored through the influence of Apollo and the saving wisdom of Minerva, by means of philosophical discipline and the purification of both intellect and desire. Yet the poet also points to the deeper causes behind the soul's journey into existence when he speaks of a certain fiery power and a heavenly beginning as the basis of its elemental nature. This alludes to the doctrine of the soul sowing into the world, a mystery spoken of in Plato's Timaeus, which suggests not only descent, but the potential for return, wholeness regained, and a life rejoined with the divine. From this, Thomas Taylor writes, the reader can readily see the sheer absurdity of Dr. Warburton's theory, that the great secret of the mysteries was simply the exposure of polytheism as false, and the teaching of a single, unified deity. Such a claim is as ridiculous as saying the secret was to instruct a man how, by annotating the works of a poet, he might become a bishop. It is hardly surprising that those who have no true understanding of the nature of the gods, who have convinced themselves that these gods were merely dead men elevated to divine status, and who judged the wisdom of the ancients by their own limited perspective, would invent such an improbable and foolish system. Yet, it is clear that this teaching was accompanied by a vision of the very source from which the soul originally descended. This is confirmed first and foremost by Apuleius, who describes his own initiation into the mysteries. He recounts that he approached the boundary of death and, having crossed the threshold of Proserpina, was carried through all the elemental realms. In the depth of night, he saw the sun shining with a dazzling light, along with both the gods of the underworld and the gods of the heavens. Near these divine beings, he offered his reverent worship. This vision is no less clearly implied by Plato, who beautifully depicts the bliss of the holy soul before its descent, alluding to the secret visions granted by the mysteries. He says that it was then permitted to behold the most splendid beauty, to share in this blessed vision and contemplation alongside a divine assembly. Some souls enjoyed this in the company of Jupiter, others with different gods, all while initiated into the most sacred of mysteries. During these divine celebrations, the soul remained pure and whole, free from the evils that later afflict it in mortal life. Through this sacred initiation, the soul became a witness to perfect, simple, immovable, and radiant visions, dwelling in a pure light. It was itself pure and immaculate, liberated from the burdensome covering we call the body, a shell binding us like an oyster to its case. Commenting on this passage, Proclus explains that initiation and the final unveiling symbolize a profound silence and union with mystical beings, experienced through spiritual visions. From this, it follows that the highest stage of this revealing was the direct vision of the gods themselves, shining with a glorious light. This vision represents those ecstatic revelations that the virtuous soul will continuously enjoy after death, and of which it can catch fleeting glimpses even while still confined within the heavy and limiting body. It is evident from the clear testimony of Proclus that in all initiations and mysteries, the gods reveal themselves in many forms, appearing in various shapes. Sometimes they manifest as a formless light, other times this light takes on a human shape or assumes different appearances. This claim of divine visions within the mysteries is further confirmed by Plotinus. Moreover, the practice of magical invocation was an essential part of the priestly role in the mysteries, a belief universally accepted throughout antiquity long before the later Platonists. This is made clear by the writings attributed to Hippocrates, or perhaps Democritus, in a treatise on the sacred disease. Speaking of those who claim to cure this affliction through magic, it is said, if they profess the ability to draw down the moon, to obscure the sun, to create stormy or fair weather, to bring rain, heat, or to render the land and sea barren, and to perform all such feats, whether this knowledge comes from the mysteries or from some other mental discipline or meditation, they seem to me to be impious for engaging in such pursuits. From all this, according to Taylor, it becomes easy to see how gravely mistaken Dr. Warburton was when he asserted that the light seen in the mysteries was nothing more than an illuminated image thoroughly purified by the priests. He is equally mistaken in applying an injunction from one of the magical oracles attributed to Zoroaster to the Eleusinian Mysteries and misunderstanding the meaning of the oracle's warning. The oracle says, in effect, Do not invoke the self-revealing image of nature, for you must not behold these things before your body has been initiated. Warburton interprets this self-revealing image as merely a diffuse shining light, as its name partly suggests. However, Taylor asserts that this is a grave misunderstanding, which careful study of Proclus's commentary on Plato's Timaeus, he claims, would have prevented. There we learn that the moon is considered the cause of nature for mortals and the self-revealing image of the fountain of nature. If we wish to understand what is meant by this fountain of nature, of which the moon is an image, the following insight, gained from extensive study of ancient theology, will clarify. Within the essence of the world's demiurge, many divine fountains exist. Among these, 3 stand out as especially prominent: the fountain of souls, represented by Juno, the fountain of virtues, represented by Minerva, and the fountain of nature, represented by Diana. This last fountain is directly connected to the life-giving goddess Rhea, and was included by the demiurge as essential for the ongoing reproduction of the cosmos. This knowledge also sheds light on certain passages in Apuleius that have confused modern readers, and led some to mistakenly believe that Apuleius acknowledged only a single deity. One such passage occurs at the start of the 11th book of his Metamorphoses, where the divinity of the moon speaks to him in majestic terms. "Behold, Lucius, moved by your prayers, I am here. I am nature, parent of all things, mistress of the elements, firstborn of time, highest among the gods, queen of the departed, first among the celestial beings. I alone am the image of all gods and goddesses, ruling by my command the shining heavens, the refreshing sea breezes, and the silent realms of the underworld. My divinity is one, yet all the earth honors me under many forms, rites, and names. The ancient Phrygians called me Pessinuntica, mother of the gods. The Athenians named me Cecropian Minerva. The islanders surrounded by waves call me Paphian Venus. The Cretans with their arrows, Dictinian Diana. The Sicilians, Stygian Proserpina, and the people of Eleusis, the venerable goddess Ceres. Others have worshipped me as Juno, Bellona, Hecate, or Rhamnusia. The enlightened peoples of the rising sun, the Ethiopians, Aryans, and Egyptians skilled in ancient wisdom, know me by my true name, Queen Isis." Elsewhere in the same work, he speaks of the moon, saying that the sun governs the world and treads upon Tartarus. The stars respond to its command, the gods rejoice, the hours and seasons return according to its decree, and the elements obey its will. This imagery makes perfect sense when understood as addressed to the divine fountain of nature residing within the demiurge, which serves as the archetype of the nature flourishing in the lunar sphere and throughout the material universe, from which the lunar deity itself ultimately originates. Since this fountain is directly connected to the life-giving goddess Rhea, it explains why it was once venerated as the mother of the gods. Moreover, because all worldly divinities are contained within the celestial gods, the various names attributed to this fountain should be seen as titles for different earthly divinities produced by it, whose essence they also share. In the next section, Taylor demonstrates that the various purifications practiced in these rites, along with initiation and the epoptea, symbolize the stages of discipline necessary for the soul's ascent. The first part of this claim, concerning purifications, follows directly from Plato's testimony, where he explains that the ultimate purpose of the mysteries was to guide us back to the original principles from which we fell. Since the mysteries are widely recognized as symbolic, it follows that the purifications, as integral parts of the mysteries, must also be symbolic. Because true inward purity, of which outward purification is but a symbol, can only be attained through the exercise of moral virtues, the purifications clearly represented the cleansing virtues. The latter part of the argument is supported by a passage from Plato's Phaedrus, in which initiation and epoptea are likened to the blessed vision of higher intelligible realities, an experience accessible only through contemplation. This entire view is strongly confirmed by Olympiodorus in his insightful commentary on Plato's Phaedo. He explains that the sacred rites begin with popular purifications, followed by more secret ones, then the gathering of diverse elements into unity, and finally inspection. In this schema, ethical and political virtues correspond to the visible purifications. Cathartic virtues that expel external influences correspond to the deeper purifications. Theoretical contemplation of intelligible forms corresponds to the gathering stage. The consolidation of these energies into an indivisible essence corresponds to initiation, and simple self-inspection of pure forms corresponds to apoptic vision. Taylor also expresses his indignation and pity at the ignorance and arrogance of modern critics, who claim this division of virtues is a later invention of the Neoplatonists, unsupported by Plato's own writings. Among these critics, Taylor regrets to find Fabricius, who in his introduction to Proclus's life, joins in this mistaken view. However, any careful reader of Plato will see that in his Laws he discusses social and political virtues. In the Phaedo and the Republic, he addresses purifying virtues, and in the Theaetetus he treats contemplative and higher virtues. This is especially evident in the Phaedo, where Socrates explicitly states at the beginning that philosophers must prepare to die and to be dead themselves, while condemning suicide. This symbolic or philosophical death can only mean the genuine exercise of purifying virtues. Unfortunately, these critics often read superficially or focus merely on linguistic corrections to display cleverness, and with such shallow preparation, they arrogantly oppose their immature views to the conclusions of men of great genius and profound inquiry. Scholars who, freed from the burdens of learning foreign languages, devoted themselves wholly to the pursuit of the highest truth. It remains only to demonstrate finally that the depiction of the soul's descent was a significant element within these mystical ceremonies. This is subtly suggested by Virgil when, describing the souls of the blessed in Elysium, he notes that after a long interval they are summoned by the divine being to the river Lethe. In this way, they forget their former earthly existence and willingly return to the vaulted realms of the world, ready once more to enter new bodies. More explicitly, Apuleius expresses this in the prayer that Psyche offers to Ceres. He calls upon the goddess by her fruitful right hand, the joyful harvest rites, the secret sacred ceremonies of her Sisti, the winged chariot of her attendant dragons, the furrows of Sicilian soil, the fierce chariot of the ravisher, the dark rituals marking Proserpina's descent, and the ascending rites celebrating her illuminated return, along with other hidden mysteries kept silent at Eleusis, pleading for relief from the sorrows of Psyche. The abduction of Proserpina symbolizes the soul's descent, as supported by Olympiodorus's earlier reference to the soul's corycal descent. This is further confirmed by the philosopher Sallust, who notes that the myth of Proserpina's abduction is said to occur near the opposite equinox, symbolizing the descent of souls into earthly life. Since this abduction was enacted in the dramatic performances of the mysteries, as Apuleius clearly shows, it unmistakably represents the soul's descent and its union with the dark body. If the mysteries dramas depicted the soul's ascent and descent, and its condition while joined with the material form, this must have been the meaning of Proserpina's abduction. This is also evident in Apuleius's own account of his initiation, where he describes approaching the threshold of death, stepping into Proserpina's domain, and returning after being carried through all the elements. The connection of the souls joining with the body was demonstrated previously with the highest authority. Readers should not be troubled by Porphyry's explanation, cited by Eusebius, that the myth of Proserpina also refers to the seed planted in the earth. This material interpretation is equally valid in its own domain. However, it is fitting to elevate the discussion by considering the different types of fables according to their philosophical classification. This approach will shed further light on the topic and defend the wisdom of the ancient fabulists from the unfair criticism of uninformed detractors. Therefore, Taylor offers here a valuable classification from Sallust's refined work on the gods and the cosmos. Fables fall into theological, physical, animastic, concerning the soul, material, and mixed categories. Theological fables pertain to the incorporeal and contemplate the very essence of the gods, such as the story of Saturn devouring his children, which signifies nothing more than the nature of an intellectual or intuitional deity, since every intellect ultimately returns into itself. Physical fables describe the workings of divine forces in the cosmos, for instance, equating Saturn with time and referring to the parts of time as children of the universe, thus the children being consumed by the parent. Animastic fables relate to the soul's operations, reflecting how the soul's intellect ions, although they extend outward in discursive activity, ultimately remain connected to their source. Finally, fables are material in nature as seen in the way the Egyptians ignorantly attribute divinity to physical elements, calling Isis the earth, Osiris the moisture, Typhon the heat, or naming Saturn as water, Adonis as fruit, and Bacchus as wine. It is indeed wise to dedicate such things to the gods, much like herbs, stones, and animals are consecrated. Yet to call these things themselves gods is the folly of the unwise, unless we speak figuratively, as when by custom we call the sun and its rays simply the sun. Mixed fables can be observed in many other tales as well. For example, the story of Discord at a divine feast, where she throws a golden apple, causing a dispute among the goddesses. Jupiter sends them to Paris to judge, and captivated by Venus's beauty, he awards her the apple. Here, the banquet represents the transcendent powers of the gods who exist in harmony, while the golden apple symbolizes the world, thrown by Discord to signify the strife arising from its composition of opposing elements. Different gods bestow various gifts upon the world, thus appearing to contest for the apple. Paris, representing a soul living by sense alone, perceives only the apple's beauty as that of Venus, unaware of the other powers at work. Among these types of fables, the theological are the realm of philosophers, the physical and spiritual belong to poets, and the mixed ones are reserved for the earliest initiatory rites, since the purpose of mystical ceremonies is to unite us with both the cosmos and the divine. From Sallust's excellent account, it is clear that the fable of Proserpina, as part of the mysteries, is properly mixed, composed of theological, spiritual, and material elements. To grasp this sacred fable fully, one must understand that according to the secret teachings of ancient theology, the choric order, associated with Proserpina, is twofold. One part is supermundane, dwelling with Jupiter or the demiurge, the artisan of divisible natures. The other is earthly, where Proserpina is said to be seized by Pluto and to enliven the universe's outermost bounds. Proclus states that, according to the theologians who passed down the most sacred mysteries, Proserpina remains on high in the dwelling places her mother prepared for her, beyond the reach of the sensory world. Yet she also dwells below with Pluto, managing earthly affairs, governing the depths of the earth, providing life to the universe's extremities, and animating beings that would otherwise be lifeless and inert. Thus, we may clearly see that this fable is of a mixed nature, part of it referring to the supermundane origin of the secondary cause of life, and the other to the outflow or procession of life and soul toward the furthest limits of existence. Let us now carefully examine the portion of the fable symbolizing the descent of souls. To do so, it is necessary to briefly summarize the secret teaching about the wanderings of Ceres, as preserved by Minucius Felix. He relates that Proserpina, daughter of Ceres and Jupiter, was gathering delicate flowers in the early spring when she was seized by Pluto and carried away from her pleasant home through dense forests and across the sea to a cavern, the realm of departed souls, over which she later ruled absolutely. Upon discovering her daughter's loss, Ceres, carrying torches and encircled by a serpent, roamed the entire earth searching until she reached Eleusis, where she found Proserpina and taught the Eleusinians how to cultivate grain. In this allegory, Ceres represents the development of the intuitional aspect of our nature, what we rightly call intellect, or the unfolding of the mind's intuitive faculty from its calm and concentrated state in the realm of pure thought. Proserpina, meanwhile, stands for the living, self-moving, and animating principle we call the soul. To avoid seeming strange to readers unfamiliar with Orphic theology, it is important to explain that Ceres, through her close association with Rhea, who bore Jupiter, clearly belongs to a Saturnian and life-generating rank, intellectual and vivifying in nature. As the philosopher Sallust informs us, she is identified among the worldly divinities as the deity of the planet Saturn. Therefore, our intellect, when in its descending phase, fittingly corresponds to the divinity of Ceres. Pluto, on the other hand, represents the entirety of material nature. According to Pythagoras, his dominion begins downward from the galaxy or Milky Way. The cavern symbolizes the entrance into the depths of this material existence, which is achieved when the soul unites with the earthly body. To fully grasp the secret meaning of the other elements of this fable, we must consider the detailed account of the abduction found in Claudian's elegant poem on the subject. There, we learn that Ceres, fearing harm to Proserpina because of her unparalleled beauty, secretly transported her to Sicily and hid her in a specially built house by the Cyclopes. Meanwhile, Ceres herself journeys to the temple of Cybele, the mother of the gods. Here, we encounter the initial cause of the soul's descent, its abandonment of a life governed entirely by higher intellect, symbolized by the separation of Proserpina from Ceres. Later, Jupiter instructs Venus to visit this secluded place and lure Proserpina out, so that Pluto may carry her away. To avoid arousing suspicion, he sends Diana and Pallas to accompany Venus. The three goddesses find Proserpina occupied in embroidering a scarf for her mother, upon which she had depicted the original chaos and the world's formation. In this part of the story, Venus must be understood as desire, which even in the celestial realms, where Proserpina dwells until she is taken by Pluto, begins quietly and subtly to enter the depths of the soul. Minerva represents the rational faculty of the soul, while Diana stands for nature, or the purely natural and vegetative aspect of our being. Both of these are now caught in the snares of desire. Finally, the embroidered web upon which Proserpina displayed the diverse beauty of the material world symbolizes the beginning of the soul's entanglement in the deceptive workings through which it becomes captivated by the beauty of imaginary forms. Let us pause to consider the poet's refined depiction of her work and dwelling. The place was made where Ceres' buildings shone, by the strong hand of the Cyclopes built. Walls rise high secured with iron gates, and massive chains bind the barriers. No sweat of Pyracmon, nor Steropes' forge, e'er wrought a work of such great toil. No wind so fierce, no river vast, could dampen the glowing or so deeply. The halls are girded with ivory, the roof held firm by brazen beams, and gleaming amber columns rise on high. Tender Proserpina herself, with gentle song, wove her gifts for her returning mother. Here she marked the sequence of elements and the ancient law of nature's order. How parent nature divided chaos, and seeds departed to their rightful places. Light things rise upward. Heavier things fall downward. The ether burned with glowing flame. The sea flowed, the earth hung suspended, and no single color filled the whole. Stars shone in gold, shells poured their colors into the waters, and shores were lifted with jewels. Falsely now waves hide their strings, swelling by artful craft. You might believe algae cling to the rocks, or that murmurs creep through the thirsty sands. She added 5 regions, marking the middle with a line glowing red from heat. Borders burned, and the threads thirsted constantly for the sun's enduring rays. 2 vital zones appeared on either side, where gentle climate prevails for humans. Then, at the far end, frozen lands lay numb, sullen with endless winter's chill, and the sacred shrines of Pluto's uncle, the fateful spirits and their abodes were painted. Ominous signs were not lacking, for lips knew tears of sudden sorrow. Following this, Proserpina, forgetting her mother's warnings, is depicted as venturing out from her refuge, led by the cunning persuasions of Venus. She urged on the Ionian waves with shining eyes, while day was not yet pure. Passion fluttered trembling on the waters, and flames played among the drifting waves. Now bold in spirit and faithless to her mother's trust, through Diana's deceit, Proserpina sought the dripping woods, just as the fates decreed. This is most fitting, for forgetfulness inevitably follows a relaxation of intellectual activity and is always accompanied by the seductive influence of desire. Her attire is no less symbolic of the soul's state in such conditions, acting chiefly through the forces and promptings of imagination and nature. The poet describes her garments with exquisite detail. Among the offspring of Ceres, now the mother's pride, soon sorrow, she moves with even step through the grass. No less in grace or honor. Pallas herself might bear shield or spear, but none could match the gathered robes of Jasper's smoothness. Never has comb produced such skillful art. No threads in fabric ever held such harmony, nor brought such lifelike form. Here the sun, born from Hyperion's seed, was made, and alongside, though unlike in shape, the moon, leaders of dawn and night. Tethys offers cradles, and soothes the infant breathers in her lap. The blue waves glow with rose-tinted rays. Titania carries in her right arm a frail child, still unshaped by light, not yet grown, nor crowned with rays. Mild in the early years, she breathes tender fire with her first cries. On her left, her sister drinks from a glassy horn, marking the soft temples with a small crescent. In this description, the sun stands for fantasy, while the moon represents nature, as is familiar to any student of Platonic thought. Their infant forms are fitting, for these powers do not reach full maturity until the soul descends into the dark embrace of matter. After this, we see her emerge upon the plain with Minerva and Diana, accompanied by a lovely procession of nymphs, clear symbols of the generative world, and therefore proper attendants to the soul about to enter the shifting realms of material existence. Proserpina's act of leaving her refuge is deeply meaningful, signaling her imminent descent. She wanders from home to gather flowers in a meadow bursting with enchanting variety and the richest scents. This vividly portrays the soul functioning mainly by natural, external life, growing weak and trapped by the deceptive allure of sensible beauty. Minerva, representing reason here, likewise surrenders herself fully to this dangerous pursuit, forsaking her true nature to indulge in the ruinous pleasures of desire. The poet renders the scene with the highest elegance. The beauty of the place surpasses even the flowers it contains. A gentle swelling in the ground creates a softly rising hill, formed with subtle slopes and crowned with vibrant greenery. Clear springs bubbled from living stone, their streams winding through the dewy grass. A grove of trees shielded the area from harsh sunlight with the coolness of their branches, claiming even the heat of summer for the chill of winter. Trees of every kind flourished here, the fir suited to the sea, the hornbeam fit for war, the oak sacred to Jupiter, the cypress that graces the tomb, the ivy rich with honey, and the laurel that sees what is to come. Boxwood shimmered with dense foliage, ivy crept along the ground, and the vine wove itself around elms. Nearby there opened a wide and still lake, which the local people named Pagusa. Surrounded by leafy woods, the surface appeared pale from the shade of the trees. The water admitted the gaze deep into its depths, allowing the eye to pass unimpeded beneath the glassy surface, revealing even the hidden secrets of its clear abyss. Here the gathered company delighted in wandering through blooming meadows. Venus encouraged them. "Now, sisters, go and gather while the morning air is still fresh, while Lucifer moistens the golden fields as he rides forward in his circling chariot." So she spoke, already showing signs of the sorrow to come. The others spread out through the varied groves. One might believe they were bees streaming from Hybla's hive to snatch up time, or a swarm let loose from the hollow beech tree, buzzing over chosen herbs in a fragrant frenzy. The honor of the fields was stripped. Here lilies were intertwined with deep violets. There soft marjoram added its scent. Elsewhere roses formed a starry path, and white privet adorned the edges. They even gathered you, Hyacinthus, still mourn for your tragic shape, and Narcissus, now a flower, once famed among the children of spring, once noble youths. You were born in Amyclae, the other on Helicon. One was struck down by a misfired discus, the other deceived by love for his reflection in the stream. Apollo weeps for one, Cephissus for the other, each bearing the wounds of beauty and illusion. Above all others, the goddess of the fertile earth showed the most eagerness in gathering. With laughter she filled her woven basket with rural spoils and, unaware, crowned herself with flowers, an omen of her destined bridal fate. Even the goddess of war laid down her spear, the same arm that once shook mighty armies and tore down city walls, and now turned to lighter pursuits, setting aside her weapon and softening her helmet with garlands. The metal crest, once a symbol of dread, now played in peace, its martial terror gone, blooming like spring. And even she who hunts in the hills and tracks the scent with hounds did not scorn the dance, submitting for once to a crown that merely touched the freedom of her untamed hair. Yet one detail remains, and it must not be left unsaid. The Narcissus itself, according to the ancient tale, was once a youth transformed into a flower because of his obsessive love for his own body. This transformation bears a deeply fitting meaning in light of Proserpina's abduction, for it was upon plucking this flower that her descent began, as Homer tells it. In Narcissus staring into the clear water and falling for his own image, we find a powerful metaphor for the soul's fascination with the transitory nature of bodily existence, falling in love with a physical life that is merely the reflection of true being, which lies in the rational and immortal essence within. Thus, through an excessive attachment to this fleeting illusion, this shimmering reflection of the true soul, a person may eventually become transformed, as much as their nature allows, into a purely vegetative existence, into something beautiful yet ephemeral, like a flower. In essence, this transformation reflects a descent into a bodily life, one entirely governed by the automatic motions of nature. It is for this reason that the soul, symbolized by Proserpina, is so fittingly shown, at the moment of her descent into the physical world, as absorbed in gathering the flower that leads to her fall. For at this stage, her entire attention is consumed by a life divided among the restless movements of the body. Then comes the violent intervention. Pluto bursts forth from beneath the earth and takes hold of Proserpina, dragging her away despite the opposition of Minerva and Diana. These two goddesses, representing wisdom and purity, are restrained from rescuing her by the will of Jupiter, who here stands for the force of necessity or fate. Their resistance simply reveals that the soul's descent into bodily nature is foreign to both her ideal form and the higher life that originates from her true being. Thus, Proserpina's lament becomes the soul's own cry. O flowers, so fatally beloved, and the wise warnings of a mother ignored, O cunning devices of deceitful Venus! And according to a certain account, Pluto carries Proserpina through tangled forests and across a vast stretch of sea before bringing her to a cavern, the realm of the dead. The forests here symbolize the entrapment of physical nature, as we've already noted, and this journey mirrors the one described in the tale of another hero's descent, where the entire middle region is cloaked by woods, and the shadowy river encircles it like a boundary. In these images, the woods signify the heaviness and complexity of the material realm, while the encircling waters represent the sorrowful tide of physical existence, flowing outward and burdened with suffering. Pluto's act of carrying Proserpina into the underworld signifies, more deeply, the soul's plunge into the dense obscurity of material life. The next scene portrays her marriage, a binding to the dark dwelling of the body. As the evening star rises over the underworld, the maiden is led to her chamber. Beside her stands the witness to this union, Night, wrapped in stars, solemnly touching the bed and sealing the marriage with a binding and eternal sign. It is with striking appropriateness that Night is invoked here, attending the soul's entrance into darkness. By uniting with the body, the soul enters the realm of obscurity, surrounded by illusions and shadows. Until she frees herself from this bondage, she remains cut off from clear vision and the experience of eternal truths. What follows is a deeply moving image of Proserpina appearing in a dream to her mother, Ceres, revealing the pain and confinement she now endures. No longer shrouded in hints and signs, the vision of the daughter appears directly to the mother's mind during sleep. She is seen in a shadowed corner of her prison, bound in harsh chains, no longer the radiant figure the goddesses once admired in the flowering valleys of Etna. Her once golden hair has lost its luster, her eyes, once bright, are darkened by the night around her. The bloom of her cheeks has vanished, drained by the chill. The proud glow of her face has faded, and her limbs, once immune to cold, are now tinted by the blackness of a subterranean prison. So transformed is she that Ceres can scarcely recognize her at first, and when at last she does, the mother cries, "What fault of yours deserves such torment? Why this disfiguring sorrow? Who has claimed such cruel power over you? Why do arms so gentle now bear chains too harsh for even beasts to wear? Are you truly my child, or are we deceived by some passing shade?" Such is the miserable condition of the soul when it becomes deeply entangled in bodily existence. No longer free, she is imprisoned and chained, stripped of her original brilliance. The contact with matter stains her purity, and the sharp clarity of her reason is dulled and obscured by the thick shadows of physical darkness. This portrayal of Proserpina, locked away in a hidden cell and bound in chains, powerfully reflects the soul's descent and imprisonment in the body, a theme that resonates throughout the teachings of ancient philosophers and sacred traditions alike. From here begins the long and sorrowful search of Ceres for her lost daughter. Some accounts describe her as surrounded by a serpent and carrying 2 burning torches. Others tell of her setting out by night in a chariot drawn by dragons. Though the symbols differ, the meaning remains the same. Both the serpent and the dragon are signs of a life divided and subject to change, marking the soul's link to the cycles of generation and decay. These creatures, known for shedding their skin and renewing themselves, are apt images of the soul's life when it enters into the realm of birth and transformation, where it must renew itself repeatedly. And what image could more fittingly capture the soul's descent into the world of the senses than Ceres wandering by torchlight through the night, pursuing her daughter even into the shadowy depths of the underworld? For when the soul's higher, thinking part turns toward the physical, it kindles a light within the darkness, but at the cost of losing its own clarity. As one philosopher beautifully noted, mortal nature may then receive a portion of divine intellect, but in the process, the intellect itself is drawn downward toward death. The weeping and grieving of Ceres, then, stand as signs of both the soul's care for the mortal world and the pain that comes from being entangled in it, especially for souls like ours, which are incomplete and vulnerable. It is no coincidence, either, that Bacchus, or Iacchus, is said to accompany her on this quest. Bacchus represents the fragmented activity of the intellect, scattered through the dark and mournful realm of the senses. His presence underscores the way higher understanding becomes dispersed and weakened when it engages too deeply with the material world. This interpretation becomes even more meaningful when we reflect on how these sacred rites unfolded over several days. This was not arbitrary. It corresponds to an ancient teaching that the soul, in falling from her heavenly origin, passed through several stages before reaching the earthly realm. Each stage involved a transformation of the soul's faculties and form, culminating in her union with the body, the lowest and most shadowy point of her journey. Appropriately, the first day of the mysteries was called the gathering, meaning a collective assembly, where souls come together, as some believed, like a great gathering of spirits within the Milky Way, assembled in their descent from the stars. It is from this point in the heavens that the soul begins its descent. Following this, the soul moves from the celestial height near the Tropic of Cancer down into the influence of the planet associated with Saturn. This transition was marked in the sacred rites by a call to the sea, where the initiates were instructed to go. This symbolic act is clarified through the teachings of ancient theology, which viewed the entire planetary order as governed by Neptune. This idea is echoed by thinkers who describe the planets as flowing like rivers, each with its own character and energy. When the soul descends into the realm of Saturn, it enters a form of matter that is still more refined than earthly substance, though changeable and unstable. Water, as a long-standing symbol in religious and mystical traditions, is used to represent this type of subtle matter. The sea, in this context, is also an emblem of purification, a theme found in ancient hymns that describe it as the greatest cleansing power among the gods. Saturn, symbolizing intuitive intellect, is said by some philosophers to have wept a tear that became the sea, an image that reveals how intellect first begins to merge with a more fluid, changing nature. Further along the soul's journey, as it approaches the sphere associated with the moon, a second set of sacred rites is enacted. This stage marks a deeper fall, where the soul turns away entirely from its divine origins and loses all memory of its former bliss. It enters a realm defined by dissimilarity, ignorance, and confusion. The repeated rites serve as a symbol of this final severance from the celestial, and the soul's plunge into the world of illusion. Finally, when the soul arrives in the earthly realm and joins with a physical body, a ceremonial offering takes place, reflecting this final stage of incarnation. Participants would fill 2 earthen vessels, one wide and conical, the other small and bowl-like. The first was placed facing the east, the second to the west. These directions were not arbitrary, but carried profound symbolic meaning. The eastern vessel, associated with the earth, represented the soul's shift from its original round and perfect form into a narrowing, downward, material condition. The western vessel, sacred to the soul, pointed back to its divine origin, since the intellect was regarded as a child of Bacchus, a symbol of the fragmented but divine consciousness now immersed in the world. The positioning of the vessels was also meaningful within the ancient cosmological view. The East, aligned with fire and ruled by Jupiter, stood for the eternal, unchanging heavens. The West, linked with the Earth and ruled by Pluto, was the realm of darkness and decay. This duality expressed the soul's tension between its celestial birth and its earthly fate. As part of the sacred drama, the initiates would make a confession during the rites. In response to the priest's questions, they would declare, "I have fasted. I have drunk from the sacred mixture. I have taken what was hidden from the sacred chest and placed it in the basket, and in turn I have taken from the basket and returned it to the chest." This ritual affirmed the soul's journey through revelation, concealment, and the cyclical process of descent and return. As this episode pertains to one of the most enigmatic and symbolic moments in the rites, centered around the wandering of the goddess Ceres, it is important to present the secret narrative, drawn concisely from the accounts of Arnobius. According to this version, while Ceres searched the earth in despair for her lost daughter, she eventually arrived at the borders of Eleusis, located in the Attic region. This place was then occupied by people known as the Earthborn, whose names included Bobo and Triptolemus, along with Desols, a herder of goats, Eubulus, who tended to swine, and Eumolpus, a shepherd from whom the lineage of the Eumolpidae was said to descend. This family would later gain renown as sacred functionaries, hierophants, heralds, and bearers of the staff, who served the holy rites. Among them, Bobo, a woman of that land, welcomed the grieving and exhausted goddess into her home, attempting to lift her spirits through kindness and attention. She offered her food and drink to soothe her thirst, hoping that care and hospitality might soften the goddess's sorrow. But Ceres, overwhelmed with anguish, rejected every effort, resisting Bobo's persistent appeals with firm resolve and unyielding grief. Despite repeated gestures of comfort, the goddess refused to be moved. Seeing that her gentle pleas were unavailing, Bobo resolved to try a more unorthodox method, believing that humor might succeed where sympathy had failed. With this in mind, she revealed that part of her body unique to women, the source of life and generation, and through some enchantment made it appear innocent and pure, like that of a young boy. She then returned to Ceres, and in the midst of her ongoing attempts to ease the goddess's burden, suddenly exposed herself in this unexpected way. This act caught the attention of Ceres, who was surprised and amused by the odd and startling gesture. The laughter that followed gently broke her sorrow, and with her mood lightened, she finally accepted the drink that she had earlier refused. This is the account as related by Arnobius. A shortened version is also found in the writings of Clement of Alexandria, who expresses outrage at what he saw as inappropriate and offensive content, especially given that it was included among the most secret elements of the Eleusinian Mysteries. However, his indignation is not surprising, since, like many early Christian teachers, he misread the story literally and failed to grasp its symbolic intent, seeing only moral corruption where mystery and metaphor were intended. The reality is that this tale formed part of the inner teachings, the secret discourses preserved to protect the sacred truths from the ridicule, distortion, or disrespect of the uninitiated. Even critics like Dr. Warburton, otherwise skeptical and severe, admitted the dignity and moral value of these ceremonies, briefly rising above his usual bias to acknowledge their worth. Moreover, as Iamblichus insightfully explains, such dramatic portrayals within the mysteries were never meant to arouse base desire, but rather to neutralize it. Through solemn ritual and sacred context, the passions were brought into view, not to be inflamed, but to be calmed and overcome. He explains that the correct method of freeing the soul from its irrational impulses is not to suppress them by force, but to let them be expressed moderately and in controlled forms, so that they lose their power, respond to guidance, and can eventually be transcended altogether. This teaching is so grounded in reason that only those who deal in superficial or fraudulent systems of philosophy or religion could oppose it. Just as one would consider a physician untrustworthy who attempts to cure a hidden bodily illness without first bringing it to the surface, thereby lessening its intensity, so too must one see as false any philosopher who seeks to eliminate the passions through forceful suppression, rather than through gentle guidance and balanced participation. Returning now from this brief digression, the deeper symbolic meaning of this mystical narrative may be interpreted as follows. The figure of Bobo represents the passive, feminine, and physical aspect of life, the earthly condition through which the soul becomes linked with the body. Through this connection, the soul is ensnared, descending from its previous state of clarity and fullness into the realm of birth, illusion, and physical existence. Thus, the goddess Ceres, as a symbol of the rational soul, in her wanderings, her gradual involvement with the material realm, is eventually charmed by Bobo's influence, signifying her attraction to bodily life. In doing so, she forgets her grief, which implies that she accepts the condition of forgetfulness and entrapment, represented by the potion Bobo offers. This drink symbolizes the mixed nature of mortal life, impure and composed of conflicting elements, and for that reason, subject to decay and death. For anything untainted and unblended remains beyond corruption, retaining its divine quality. It is necessary here to prevent the reader from misunderstanding the sequence of events. Though the story begins with the abduction of Proserpina and then turns to Ceres's journey, this does not suggest that the intuitive intellect descends only after the soul, or separately from it. Rather, the intellect, by its superior essence, holds priority over the soul in origin, not in time, and the tale illustrates that the fall or turning away from the divine begins with the soul. The intellect then follows, not apart from it, but bound together in an inseparable union during this descent into the lower world. From this understanding of the tale, the meaning of the ritual affirmation becomes clear. Statements such as, "I have fasted," and "I have drunk the blended drink." The first refers to the higher intellect's abstention from worldly involvement before it succumbs to the forgetfulness brought on by the illusions of bodily life. It avoids, as far as its nature allows, even the most basic pleasures of the senses. The second, referring to the blended drink, clearly alludes to Proserpina's descent into the underworld and her eventual return to the realm of her mother. This symbolizes the soul's cycle of falling into the material world and its ascent back to the intelligible realm, where it regains its divine and intellectual identity. The sacred container, or cister, held the most secret symbols of the mysteries, and it was forbidden for those uninitiated to behold them. Whatever these objects were, we learn from a hymn to Ceres that they were made of gold, a metal that, because it does not decay, stands as a sign of the soul's immaterial and incorruptible nature. On the other hand, the basket, or calathus, according to later sources, was filled with the harvest or spoils of the fields, clear symbols of a bodily and perishable form of life. Thus, when the initiate declared that they had taken something from the cister and placed it into the calathus, or the reverse, they were symbolically acknowledging the soul's fall from an elevated, spiritual existence into a mortal and physical one. At the same time, they affirmed that through adherence to the purity taught in the mysteries, it was possible to rise once again to the original excellence from which the soul had tragically descended. What now remains is to examine the final portion of this mythic account or sacred allegory. According to the story, once the goddess Ceres arrived at Eleusis and found her daughter, she shared with the people there the knowledge of cultivating grain. Another version, told by the poet Claudian, presents Ceres's wandering in search of her daughter as the moment through which humanity first learned the practice of agriculture, a gift passed on by the goddess during her journey. The hidden meaning behind this becomes clear when we recognize that the descent of higher intellect into the realm of physical existence brings with it the highest enrichment and elevation that the material world can receive. Without the presence of intellect in the lowest layers of embodied life, only the irrational aspects of the soul and a life governed by mere instinct would remain, trapped in the dim and chaotic world of the body. Just as farming, and especially the cultivation of grain, stands as the most vital support to our bodily existence, it becomes a fitting image for the immeasurable benefit bestowed by the presence and activity of intellect within the physical world. The growth of corn, then, reflects the blessings brought by the divine intellects unfolding into mortal life. To imagine a night with no moonlight or stars is to imagine the bleakest darkness, yet even that would fall short of the dreadful condition of material existence if it were completely without the presence and illumination of divine reason and influence. This concludes the interpretation of the Eleusinian Mysteries, the tale of Ceres and Proserpina. While it's clear that these rites primarily symbolize the soul's descent into generation, as noted by the wise Sallust, the myth also alludes, in keeping with its dual nature, to the divine presence entering into the world beneath the heavens. But when reading the story in this way, one must avoid equating our limited and individual intellect with the singular, divine intellect. In the divine realm, all is godlike. Intellect stands supreme, followed by soul. So when the myth speaks of loss, wandering, grief, and searching, these should be understood as symbolic descriptions of how divine powers extend themselves to support lower forms of being, not as signs of imperfection or suffering within the divine itself. Such processes reflect divine care and guidance, without diminishing the excellence of what is given. To complete this reflection, it is worth turning to a striking visual account of Proserpina's abduction, found in the ancient solar-themed illustrations attributed to Hieronymus Aleander. In the image, Ceres is seen riding in a chariot drawn by two dragons. Nearby Diana and Minerva appear with an overturned harvest basket at their feet, pointing toward Proserpina, who is being carried away by Pluto in his chariot, clearly resisting with outstretched arms. Hercules stands close by with his club raised, as though attempting to stop Pluto's advance, and finally, Jupiter is shown with his hand extended, suggesting his willingness to aid in Proserpina's release. To close this section, a passage from Plutarch may be added, one that not only supports the ideas expressed here but gains clarity and depth through them. The early teachings on nature, both among the Greeks and the peoples they called barbarians, were in essence philosophical reflections on the natural world, but expressed through stories clothed in myth. These accounts often hid deeper meanings beneath symbols and allegories. At the same time, they conveyed a form of theological instruction that, like the mysteries, presented open narratives that were easier for the public to grasp, while the unspoken elements invited deeper inquiry and contemplation. This becomes clear when examining the Orphic hymns, as well as traditions from Egypt and Phrygia. Yet, it is the rites of initiation and the symbolic acts performed in sacred ceremonies that best reveal how the ancients understood these matters. Among these sacred traditions are the Dionysian rites attributed to Orpheus. These were based on a mysterious myth, parts of which have already been discussed, while the rest is preserved in the writings of various ancient authors. In this myth, Dionysus, also known as Bacchus or Zagreus, while still a child, was enticed by the Titans, who were acting under the influence of Juno, through playful diversions suited to his youthful nature. One of these amusements involved a mirror, which fascinated him as he admired his own reflection. But during this moment of enchantment, he was violently torn apart by the Titans. Their cruelty went further. They boiled his limbs in water and then roasted them over fire. As they began to consume his flesh, the aroma reached Jupiter, who, recognizing the horror of the act, hurled his thunderbolts at the Titans. He then entrusted the remains of Dionysus to Apollo, who was responsible for ensuring a proper burial. However, the heart of Dionysus had been saved in the midst of his dismemberment by the goddess Pallas, who preserved it. Through this act, Dionysus was born anew, restored to his full divine nature, and returned to his place among the gods. Meanwhile, from the smoke and vapors that rose from the burnt remains of the Titans, humankind was said to have been formed. To uncover the deeper message of this myth, we must recall an earlier point. All myths connected with mystery cults carry a dual meaning. Thus, just like the story of Proserpina, this tale simultaneously points toward divine realities and toward the journey of the human soul, as will become evident in the interpretation that follows. First, Dionysus or Bacchus, in his highest and most abstract sense, represents the spiritual core of the soul of the cosmos. There are many manifestations of this god, many Bacchuses, each one expressing some part of his divine essence. The Titans symbolize the cosmic deities, among whom Bacchus is the foremost. Jupiter in this context signifies the creator and craftsman of the world. Apollo, the solar deity, stands for harmony and order, maintaining unity through radiant principles and balancing forces, bridging both the visible and invisible realms. Minerva, on the other hand, represents the primal, guiding intellect, an eternal and provident force that upholds intermediate forms of life through reason and self-sustaining awareness, shielding them from the chaos and threat posed by matter. The myth speaks of Bacchus's infancy at the time of his dismemberment to hint at the nature of intellect itself. According to Orphic doctrine, souls under the influence of Saturn, who symbolizes pure intellect, do not move from youth to old age as we do now. Instead, their development is reversed. They journey from age back to youth, a sign of their inward and timeless essence. The tactics used by the Titans to deceive Dionysus are emblematic of the outward and divided powers of the gods of the cosmos, powers through which the shared intellect of Dionysus appears to be fragmented. The mirror, in this context, represents, using the language of the philosopher Proclus, the universe's inability to fully receive and reflect the complete brilliance of intellectual being. The deeper meaning behind Dionysus's dismemberment, set in motion by Juno's influence and followed by the punishment of the Titans, is beautifully explained by Olympiodorus in his commentary on Plato's dialogue Phaedo. He writes that the universal form is stripped away, broken apart, and scattered throughout the realm of generation. Dionysus, he says, is the singular essence, or monad, at the core of the Titans. His dismemberment is attributed to the schemes of Juno because she is the divine overseer of movement and progression. In Homer's epic, she is the one who continually stirs Jupiter into providential action regarding the affairs of the world. On another level, Dionysus serves as the divine overseer of birth and decay, since he presides over both life and death. He governs life through the principle of generation, and death through the ecstatic state caused by wine. According to Proclus, this ecstatic condition intensifies at the moment of death, as shown in the example of Homer, who was said to have gained prophetic vision at the end of his life. It is also said that both tragedy and comedy fall under Dionysus's domain, comedy reflecting the playful surface of life, and tragedy expressing its deep passions and eventual demise. Comic playwrights, then, are mistaken when they accuse the tragedians of misrepresenting Dionysus, claiming such things never happened to him, for the myths are symbolic. Jupiter's thunderbolt, directed at the Titans, represents a turning or transformation, as fire naturally moves upward. Thus, through this act, Jupiter draws the Titans back into unity with his own divine nature. The sequence of Dionysus's body being first boiled in water and then roasted in fire is symbolic of the descent of intellect into matter and its eventual return. The Egyptians regarded water as the image of matter, and fire as the emblem of ascent. The preservation of Dionysus's heart by Minerva is especially fitting, since she is the divine guardian of life, and the heart itself stands for life's essence. This part of the myth makes it clear that even while spiritual life is dispersed throughout the universe, its core remains untouched, safeguarded by the ever-watchful care of divine wisdom. Apollo, being the source of unity and the harmonizer of all things, is rightly described as the keeper of life's fountain. That is why it falls to him to bury Dionysus's scattered limbs, so that, through a new birth, they may re-emerge and be restored to their original wholeness. However, it is important to understand that when renewal is spoken of in connection to the gods, it does not mean literal rebirth, but rather the reappearance of their essence and light to lower beings. Likewise, when divine beings are said to be punished, it simply refers to a form of secondary divine care directed toward beings that have strayed or become less pure. This care has a corrective aspect, but does not imply suffering in the human sense. Taking all of this into account, we can begin to grasp the true purpose of this mysterious tale. It seeks to illustrate how the form of the cosmic intellect is distributed throughout creation. Though this intellect appears to be divided, it remains whole even in its dispersal. Each portion, though separated, is always in motion toward reunion with its source. Thus, divine illumination descends into the shadowy depths of matter, clothing it with the brilliance of higher light, while simultaneously remaining connected to its origin, never severed from the principle from which it came. Let us now turn to the final part of the myth, which tells us that human souls were formed from the vapors rising from the ashes of the Titans' burnt bodies. This idea, when considered alongside the earlier part of the myth, can be seen as describing the nature of a soul like ours, an intellect that is partial and fragmented. According to Olympiodorus, we are composed of fragments because, by entering into generation, our existence has extended into the furthest realm of separation, and we are formed from the remnants of the Titans, since the Titans are the last creators of things, standing closest to what they help bring into being. Furthermore, our irrational nature is Titan-like, because it is this unruly part of the soul that pulls apart the higher, rational element. When we scatter the Dionysian force within us, that intuitive intellect that lives in the inner depths of our being, uniting the higher and lower aspects of reality, we mirror the Titans. We become, in essence, apostates of our divine nature. But if we instead center ourselves in harmony with this Dionysian essence, then we rise above the chaos and become like Bacchus himself, wise guardians over our irrational impulses. Dionysus, in this sense, is the protector of the soul's destiny, loosening the ties that bind it to the body, for he is the origin of the divided life. It is essential, however, that the receptive or feminine part of our irrational nature, which binds us to bodily form and is merely an echo of the true soul, undergo the consequences of descending into this lower realm. When the soul abandons the uniqueness of her divine origin, she seeks her own likeness again, but now clothed in a variety of bodily forms. In doing so, she forfeits her original unity, lost in the scattering effect of her descent into the material world shaped by titanic forces. To fully understand how the descent of our souls reflects the division of intuitive intellect among worldly beings, we should consider a powerful insight from Olympiodorus's commentary on Plato's Phaedo. He writes that the soul must first cast an image of herself into the body. This act gives life to the body. Next, she must grow attached to that image, drawn to it by a shared pattern or likeness. For every external shape becomes united with its inner source through a natural pull toward identity. Then, being placed within the divided realm of generation, the soul is broken apart and drawn into the deepest level of separation. Only through a life of purification can she rise from this fragmented state, release the bond of attachment, and regain her independence from the outer form, re-establishing herself in the life she knew at the beginning. This same process is reflected in the myth. Dionysus, whose image appeared in a mirror, chased after it, becoming thereby dispersed into all things. Apollo, representing purification and renewal, then gathered the scattered pieces and raised him up. As the one who purifies and restores, Apollo becomes the true savior of Dionysus, and for this reason, sacred hymns refer to him as Dionysites. As the same author insightfully explains, the soul moves through a cycle both mystical and worldly, fleeing from an indivisible and Dionysian life, and acting under a rebellious and titanic force. It becomes trapped within the body, like a prisoner. Because of this, the soul endures punishment and attends to its limited, secondary concerns. But once purified from titanic corruption and gathered into unity, it becomes Bacchus. That is, it returns to the true wholeness of its nature, guided by the divine principle reigning above. From this, it clearly follows that one who lives in a Dionysian manner rests from toil and is released from their bonds. They leave behind their prison, or better said, their life of apostasy. Such a person is a philosopher cleansing themselves from the stains of earthly existence. Moreover, through this understanding of Dionysus, we can grasp the truth in Plato's observation that the purpose of the mysteries is to bring us back to the perfection from which we originally descended. Dionysus himself dwells in this perfection, setting perfect souls upon the throne of his father, that is, in the fullness of life according to Jupiter's governance. Thus, the perfected soul necessarily dwells with the gods, according to the will of those divine beings who are the sources of ultimate perfection. Finally, the thyrsus, carried in the Bacchic procession, serves as a fitting symbol of the diffusion of higher nature into the material world. As a reed full of knots, it represents the reformation of divided material substance from its scattered state. Olympiodorus, commenting on the Phaedo, notes that the thyrsus is a titanic plant, and it was customary to hold it before Bacchus instead of his father's scepter, symbolizing his descent into our partial nature. Indeed, the Titans themselves bear the thyrsus, and Prometheus is said to have hidden fire within a reed. This act represents bringing heavenly light into generation, leading the soul into the body, or summoning divine illumination, the uncreated whole, into created existence. Because of this, Socrates referred to the many as thyrsus-bearers in an Orphic sense, meaning they live according to the Titanic life. This reveals much of the hidden meaning behind the fable, which was central to these mystical rites. Let us now turn to the symbols used in the Bacchic ceremonies, which Clemens Alexandrinus records, summarized in these Orphic verses. A wheel, a pine nut, and the wanton plays, which move and bend the limbs in various ways. With these the Hesperian golden fruit combine, which beauteous nymphs defend with voices divine. To these symbols Clemens adds a mirror, a fleece of wool, and the ankle bone. Regarding the wheel, since Dionysus, as we have explained, represents the cosmic intellect, and intellect by nature elevates and turns back upon itself, nothing suits intellectual activity better than the image of a wheel or sphere. Moreover, the tearing apart and scattering of Dionysus symbolizes the unfolding of intellectual light into matter and its simultaneous return to its source. This movement is fittingly expressed by the turning wheel. Next, the pine nut, with its conical form, clearly symbolizes how intellectual or spiritual illumination proceeds outward from its source into material existence. As Macrobius observes, the soul, originating from a perfect roundness, the sole divine shape, extends into a conical form as it goes forth. The higher intellect is symbolized in the same way. The playful movements that bend the limbs obviously allude to the Titanic arts that seduced Dionysus and secretly signify the faculties of the cosmic intellect as they exist in an apparent and divisible state. The golden apples of the Hesperides represent the pure and incorruptible nature of that intellect, or Dionysus, held by the world. According to Sallust, a golden apple is a symbol of the world itself, likely because of its outward form and the incorruptible intellect it contains, which shines externally. Gold's resistance to decay aptly represents an unchanging, immaterial essence. The mirror, already explained, returns as a symbol. The fleece of wool stands for the tearing apart or distribution of intellect or Dionysus into matter. The Greek verb meaning to tear in pieces, used in describing the Bacchic dismemberment, evokes the image of wool being ripped apart. Isidorus even traces the Latin word for wool back to words meaning to tear or pluck. It is also notable that in Greek, the word for wool closely resembles the word for wine press, which is no coincidence. Pressing grapes serves as a clear symbol of dispersion, just like tearing wool, which likely explains why grapes were sacred to Bacchus. An unpressed grape represents what is gathered together, while the pressed juice symbolizes the spreading out of what was once unified. Finally, the ankle bone, as a key part in animal movement, fittingly belongs among the sacred symbols of Bacchus. It represents the god's extension into the realm of physical existence, since nature, or the divisible life that surrounds the body and produces seeds, directly depends on Bacchus. Proclus notes that the sexual organs of this god are called Diana by the theologians, who governs the whole process of natural generation, bringing all natural causes into the light and extending fruitful power even to the underworld. This helps explain why in the Orphic hymn to nature she is described as turning round silent traces with the ankle bones of her feet. It is highly significant to note that in this verse of the hymn, nature is praised as fortune, depicted as the goddess standing with her feet upon a wheel that she continuously turns. This idea is clearly confirmed by a subsequent verse from the same hymn, which speaks of moving swiftly upon an eternal wheel. It should not surprise us that nature is honored as fortune, for in the Orphic hymn to fortune she is invoked as Diana, and as noted earlier, the moon is described as the self-revealing symbol of nature. Indeed, the apparent changeability of fortune aligns well with the ever-shifting and fluctuating realms governed by nature. What remains now is to explain the hidden significance of the sacred attire worn by initiates of the Dionysian Mysteries, which prepared them for the enthronement, an act of solemnly sitting upon a throne around which other initiates would dance. The details of this sacred costume are recorded in Orphic verses preserved by Macrobius. He who wishes to express in sacred splendor the radiant body of the sun must first don a veil of bright purple, like pale white rays mingled with fiery light. Then on his right shoulder hang a broad mule's hide, decorated richly with spotted patterns, symbolizing the divine pole and the intricate stars whose eternal orbs shine bright. Over his vest, a golden belt is bound, a mighty sign of how the rising sun emerges from the earth's far limits and night, suddenly bursting forth with unmatched power. Piercing the waves of ancient ocean on its path, a boundless brilliance, captured in dew, dances on his swirling waves, splendid to behold, while his surrounding waters spread out fully before the shining god's radiant presence. For ocean's circle, like a luminous belt, girds the sun's broad chest and enchants the watching eyes. First, let us consider why this sacred dress of Bacchus is meant to symbolize the sun. This becomes clear when we recall that, in Orphic theology, the divine intellect of every planet is called a Bacchus, each known by a distinct name. Thus, the intellect of the solar deity is called the Bacchus Triatericus. Second, because the sun's divinity, according to ancient secret teachings, exists both above the mundane realm and within it, it is entirely of a transcendent and intellectual nature. Therefore, as a supermundane being, the sun must both generate and contain the cosmic intellect, Dionysus, within its essence, for all earthly intellects exist within and come forth from these higher divine beings. Proclus, in his Refined Hymn to the Sun, declares that the sun is celebrated as the illustrious parent of Dionysus. Furthermore, it is through the presence of Dionysus within the sun that this luminary obtains its circular motion. This is clearly expressed in an Orphic verse which states that the sun is called Dionysus because it moves with a circular motion through the vast heavens. This is fitting, for intellect, as previously noted, is wholly of a transforming and uplifting character. From this, it becomes clear why the garments of Dionysus are associated with the sun. Next, the veil, which resembles a blend of fiery light, serves as a clear symbol of the solar fire. The spotted mule skin, intended to represent the starry heavens, is actually an image of the moon. According to Proclus's commentary on Hesiod, the moon shares a mixed nature similar to that of a mule. It grows dark through its connection with the earth, yet receives its proper light from the sun. Thus, the spotted hide stands for the moon adorned with many stars. This corresponds to the Orphic hymn to the moon, where the goddess is praised as shining amidst beautiful stars, and she is called the Queen of the Stars. The golden belt or zone is understood to symbolize the circle of ocean, as the final verses clearly demonstrate. You may wonder what the rising of the sun through the ocean, from the edges of earth and night, has to do with the adventures of Bacchus. The answer is that no symbol could be more fitting. The ocean represents an earthly nature, turbulent, restless, and endlessly moving without pause. The sun's emergence from these stormy depths is a vivid symbol of the higher spiritual nature, seemingly rising from a dark, shifting material realm and bringing form and beauty to the sensible world through its light. Taylor here says, seemingly rising, because the spiritual nature constantly radiates its splendor with unwavering energy, though it is not always perceived by those illuminated. Furthermore, since psychical beings can only partially and intermittently receive the divine light, myths about this temporary participation serve to veil the imperfection of lower natures by attributing it to the higher ones, in accordance with observable phenomena. This depiction of the rising sun is a beautiful emblem of the rebirth of Bacchus, which signifies the dawning of intellectual light and its revelation to subordinate levels of existence. The mysteries of Bacchus, like those of Ceres, concern, in part, the descent of a portion of intellect into matter and its state when united with a dark body. However, there is a difference. The myth of Ceres and Proserpine addresses the descent of the entire rational soul, whereas that of Bacchus speaks only of the scattering and emergence of the supreme part of our nature, which we rightly call intellect. In both myths, we find the marks of profound wisdom and hidden theology, an ancient and venerable theology notable for its depth and truth. Taylor concludes his work by presenting a valuable and exquisitely composed hymn by Proclus dedicated to Minerva, which he discovered in the British Museum. Until this discovery, the existence of this hymn appears to have been completely unknown. It is found among the Harleian manuscripts, in a volume that contains several Orphic hymns. Due to the carelessness of the transcriber, it has been indiscriminately grouped with these hymns, along with other hymns by Proclus previously printed in the Bibliotheca Graeca of Fabricius. Regrettably, the hymn is written in a very obscure script and with such inaccuracy that, despite Taylor's efforts to restore the text to its original form, he was forced to omit 2 lines and part of a third, as they were beyond his ability to decipher or correct. Fortunately, the majority, and certainly the most important portion, remains clear and intelligible, and he now offers it to readers along with some corrections and a paraphrased English translation. The original hymn is remarkably elegant and devout, containing one mythological detail not found anywhere else. It also shows a clear connection to the preceding Bacchus myth, which explains its inclusion in this discussion. Daughter of aegis-bearing Jove, divine, propitious to thy votaries' prayer incline, from thy great father's fount supremely bright, like fire resounding, leaping into light. Shield-bearing goddess, here to whom belong a manly mind and power to tame the strong, O sprung from matchless might, with joyful mind, accept this hymn, benevolent and kind. The holy gates of wisdom, by thy hand, are wide unfolded, and the daring band of earth-born giants, that in impious fight strove with thy fire, were vanquished by thy might. Once by thy care, as sacred poets sing, the heart of Bacchus, swiftly slaughtered king, was saved in either, when, with fury fired, the Titans fell against his life conspired, and with relentless rage and thirst for gore, their hands his members into fragments tore. But ever watchful of thy father's will, thy power preserved him from succeeding ill, till from the secret counsels of his fire, and born from Semele through heavenly sire, great Dionysus to the world at length, again appeared with renovated strength. Once, too, thy warlike axe, with matchless sway, lopped from their savage necks the heads away of furious beasts, and thus the pests destroyed, which long all-seeing Hecate annoyed. By thee benevolent great Juno's might was roused, to furnish mortals with delight, and through life's wide and various range, it is thine, each part to beautify with art divine. Invigorated hence by thee, we find a demiurgic impulse in the mind. Towers proudly raised, and for protection strong, to thee dread guardian deity, belong, as proper symbols of exalted height thy Ceres claims amidst the courts of light. Lands are beloved by thee, to learning prone, and Athens, O Athena, is thy own, great goddess, here, and on my dark-kned mind, pour thy pure light in measure unconfined, that sacred light, O all-protecting queen, which beams eternal from thy face serene. My soul, while wandering on the earth, inspire with thy own blessed and impulsive fire, and from thy fables, mystic and divine, give all her powers with holy light to shine. Give love, give wisdom, and a power to love, incessant tending to the realms above, such as unconscious of base earth's control gently attracts the vice-subduing soul, from night's dark region aids her to retire, and once more gain the palace of her sire. O all propitious to my prayer incline, nor let those horrid punishments be mine which guilty souls in Tartarus confine, with fetters fast-kned to its brazen floors, and locked by hell's tremendous iron doors. Hear me, and save, for power is all thine own, a soul desirous to be thine alone. Notably, the hymn mentions Minerva's exploits involving the severing of the heads of wild beasts with an axe, a detail not recorded by any other writer, nor is there any trace of such an event in the traditional accounts of Minerva or Hecate. From this, Taylor suggests it is reasonable to conclude that this belonged to the secret Orphic traditions regarding these goddesses, which were seldom mentioned and known only to a select few. Sadly, the works that might have shed more light on these mysteries are lost to us.